Hello and welcome back to Radio 2, but we're continuing right where we left it off. And today we're going to be looking at features and speciality music shows specifically. But before we delve into that, I want to do a brief recap of where we ended it off in the previous lesson, which was with playlisting, which is also extremely important for any radio station. And with regards to playlisting, what we said is we looked at the two categories that was used to create playlists at a radio station in the 1950s, which is where this all started. Okay, so eventually the two boxes became a lot of different boxes depending on the format, and it slowly became a huge administrative burden to program and keep the track of all the songs in the rotations. Which is where the introduction of the computerized music scheduling systems came in. So something like Selector from RCS or Music Master. So scheduling products came into account here. So scheduling programs came into play, and these systems offered a range of different options. Okay, but music programs are primarily driven by electronic data, first and foremost. This data includes not just the title and the artist of the song, but several other pieces of information. So things like the song's duration, the length of the intro, the texture, the tempo, the era, as well as whether the song features a male or a female vocalist, whether it's instrumental. Why is that important? Because we want to take into consideration which songs we play back to back. Like, for instance, we don't want to beautiful female vocalists who sing ballads back to back, for instance. We want to mix it up. Okay, so some tracks can also be labeled as good hour starters. So something that's got a bit of a kick, something to start off the hour with, in the right style, the right tone. While others might have scheduling restrictions, so like I said, not two back-to-back songs or only certain hours that it's allowed to play in because there might be an offensive language in it. So you limit these songs then to be played at certain times of the day. In addition, this essentially comprises a song database that will contain the copyright details required for accurate reporting to the collection societies. So to SAMRO in South Africa, because like I've previously said, the radio stations compile lists of songs that they've played in a month or at the end of the year in the year, which goes to SAMRO, okay, with the idea that SAMRO pays out the artists. So there are tracks for specific slots of the programming clock. These are required for the music slots in the programming clock for each hour of the week. This includes the specific category, style, or the era of the music that would be acceptable, and the music limitations that may be placed in that slot. And then there are scheduling rules. So these rules are applied to all programs. They instruct the scheduling system to, for example, avoid playing two songs by the same artist in the same hour or back to back. These rules also specify minimum repetition intervals for songs in different categories. The program can be asked to avoid playing a song in the same day part until it has been played at a specific number of other times of the day. But how do you know what music your listeners like? So you can decide what rules you should program into your music scheduling system in order to create an appropriate playlist. So this first part of putting together a music playlist strategy, and in research that was collected in 2008, they say that music tastes are neurologically programmed around the age of 15 to 21, in which time one begins to form an identity of the self. For instance, the sense of who you are. This is part of the reason why people still love the music that they listened to during that period of their lives. Okay, and this is then applied to radio station music policies. The year that was used, 2016, was the benchmark, okay? The station's narrow target market, which was ages 20 to 24, was defined to find the years when they were 15 to 21 years old. These years were identified as 2007 until 2016, which then informed the narrow state of music that the station should play, or the core of the station's music. A larger target audience, sometimes called a secondary audience, was then also identified. This secondary audience comprised of the ages 16 to 26. The years when these specific listeners were 15 to 21 years old were then identified as 2005 up until 2016, which then informed the larger set of music that the station should play, or the bulk of the music. The core of the music offering would therefore comprise of music that was popular from 2007 until 2016, with the larger music scope stretching back to 2005. This was the same music that this particular CHR station's target audience loves, and according to which they had defined their lives. The station continued to use the strategy, which required that it regularly clean the music database in order to remain relevant to the target audience as defined by its station strategy. In Feb 2013, Thomas Geiger wrote a case study after which he was approached by a music director of a local Serbian station in Eastern Europe. The music director asked for advice on how to reorganize the music database and format clocks in order to obtain a more structured music playlist. And there were 3 sets of data that has been discussed. First and foremost, analyze the radio market in the station. So every playlisting exercise needs to start with an in-depth analysis of the target market and the audience's needs. This can be done through using market studies and secondary research. Market studies usually indicate the market's favorite genres or the music from specified years. Okay. Secondly, you're going to review the music library and the categories. So if the station isn't new, it's important to look at the current library and available categories in order to get a good feel for what is currently taking place. And then thirdly, use image rotation categories. And to be able to do that, you need to define your target market, and you start by defining the top end of your target market. And then you don't go back much further than 35 years in music industry. So the formula for this year's era border, the age of your oldest target listener minus 10 years equals the number of years that you go back. So in the case of the Serbian station, it was 35 years because it was 45 minus 10 years gives you 35, which means he did this in 2013. So 2013 minus 35 was 1978. If we were to do it today, if we were to do this today, it would be 1986, which would then be the cutoff date for the radio station's music library. And then play mass appeal songs only. Okay, so once you've established your era borders, it's important to create a list of songs that reflect these era borders and play the most popular songs of these eras. Then you limit the number of categories that you have. Okay, so you have your high rotation, you have a low rotation, you have a current rotation. You might have local songs, you might have international or foreign or African songs or whatever it might be, and then you have your imaging. And then from there, you fill in your music categories with the aim that you have around, well, in this case, there was around 650 songs left. We've gone through that whole genre where we looked at CHR songs versus AC songs, and we said that AC songs would have, AC music categories would have more songs because people are older, so they are a lot further that they can go back versus the younger generation or the youth. And then you could design your basic format clock with your top of the hour and your bottom of the hour songs. So out of this, you should now be able to do a clock and a clock spin-off. Okay, so you should be able to alternate versions of your clocks also. And then you just set up your scheduling system from there with your different programs, different hours, day parts, days of the week, and your quota requirements, which are very important. And from there, it leads us to today. So the majority of radio stations don't broadcast in the sense of using the precise definition of the word. Instead, they tend to narrowcast or super serve, which is to aim a broadcast at a narrowly defined area or audience. And they tend to narrowcast or super serve to a targeted audience, thereby increasing their target market listener base. So the people of a certain age bracket or type or gender or earning bracket. So LSMs versus SEMs, who will be able to be the best possible delivery market for potential advertisers. So people generally know what they want from their favorite radio station. I know what I want from my favorite radio station. And with consistency of music and content based on solid and regular research, you can create a reasonable expectation and relationship of trust with your loyal listeners. So your P1 listeners, as they're called in the radio industry, your core listenership. In such cases, they will stay with your station even when on-air talents switch shows or leave the station. And they will do so steadfastly through changes in music popularity and genre trends. Remember, they are also not to be discounted listeners who listen from time to time to specific personalities. But prefer other radio stations as their favorite or their main radio station when their schedules allow it. So your your P2 or your P3 listeners, okay? So I have stations like that. For instance, there are certain times of the day that I love tuning into Cape Town radio stations. So I love listening to Heart FM there, and I love listening to KFM there only at certain times because I love tuning into certain presenters to hear what they are doing. But my favorite radio station is still 702, purely because of the content and the presenters, and the type of content that they use on the station. Even with the most targeted programming and consistent research, there will still be periods with which your listeners will not be able Even with the most targeted programming and consistent research, there will still be periods in which your listeners will not be available as an audience. This is the primary reason for specialist programming. To mitigate this loss, radio stations often have a variety of shows that are targeted to different audiences, and the programming of each of these shows is different and tailored to the audience that are likely to be listening at those times. As well as specialist shows to target different audiences, radio stations can tailor themselves completely over weekends or on certain days to specialize in certain genres of music or to talk to different target audiences. The formula for specialist programming is as follows. Potential listeners during the low listener time on the station minus the current listenership equals potential targeted programming. We can use 702 as an example in which specialist programming has played a significant role in the cumulative growth of listeners over the weekends. 702's figures at the beginning of 2019 were 517,000 listeners over 7 days. Of those 517,000 listeners, cumulative listeners, only 332,000 came from the weekdays. So 185,000 listeners only listened to the show over the weekend, during which the station programs more specialist shows. Talk radio stations run talk shows and segments throughout the entire week, with the change in programming on the weekends switching to lighter best of shows or sports shows, lifestyle shows, music shows. However, this factor depends on the specific station's licensing conditions, okay, ICASA licensing conditions, which will determine the percentage of music to talk that a station is allowed to play. Weekend talk figures are usually lower, as the lifestyle of the weekday listener is more relaxed on the weekend. Radio 702 was an AM music station in Gauteng until the late 1980s. At that time, Radio 5, now 5FM, was moved by the SABC from a medium wave to FM in larger city centers. The station 702, however, could not compete with 5FM and struggled to stay popular. The station therefore changed its format to half talk and half adult contemporary music in 1989. Eventually, though, in 1991, it transitioned into a full talk and news station, except over the weekends, where they retained their solid gold and their big band genre shows as their two music offerings. By 2016, they canned the big band show. By 2016, they canned the Big Band Show, and relaunched the Solid Gold as Solid Soul in response to the station's target market at the time. Local music radio stations had deviated from their targeted format, which created a music opportunity for the station over the weekend. Music would now be broadcast from 10 to midnight on Saturdays and from 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening. So for these shows, it was also important to establish personalities that were associated with the target listener's choice of music formats. When it comes to specialist shows, there are generally two types. And those are called block programming and show programming. Block programming occurs over the weekends, focusing on specialty music programming, such as the Solid Gold Saturday or adult contemporary / pop, R&B with soul music and slow R&B jams, and inspirational or religiously inspired music on the Sunday. Whereas show programming, these shows are compiled by specialists in different genres, such as the 60s and 70s, music specifically from Africa, jazz music. These shows ensure that their presenters are recognized experts in their fields. So for 702, listenership numbers have grown over the weekends for this reason, contributing to the 7-day figures. It's important to know that specialty programming requires monitoring and tweaking, okay? As other music radio stations can super serve their target market. So they always need to make sure what they're doing when it comes to adding specialty shows like these or specialist shows. Because music stations can at any point change their format and start to compete directly with your station's approach, okay? So these are the types of things that have to be taken into consideration. Specialty shows are shows that go against the grain of regular programming. They're different in their sound and their content to the rest of the shows on the radio station. So in other words, they are programmed differently. These can be specifically designed as a weekly or as a daily show. The weekly or the daily speciality show could be created to cater for a slightly different core market or core target market of a radio station and to attract a different type of audience. Commercially, these shows are about bringing in different groups of people that wouldn't ordinarily be catered through through the normal programming. The idea here is that the show ensures that their presenters are recognized experts in their field. So whoever does the show would be an expert in that specific category. In the same way, you get specialist features, where you have specialists, you get specialist features. Let's say, for instance, the Money Show with Bruce Whitfield, the Ask a Man feature. When it comes to the specialty programming, though, it requires monitoring and tweaking because a music station can at any time turn around, change its formats, and then be direct competition for a talk radio station that does block programming on the weekends, meaning that these stations need to keep monitoring their listeners and keep tweaking these shows to stay current. Just some more examples. Just briefly again, specialty shows. This is the show that you will specifically tune in for. So it's called Appointment Listening. They sound different and their content would be a little bit different to the rest of the shows on the radio station because they are programmed differently. This can be a daily show or a weekly show, but it will happen at the same time, very similar to a feature. So the whole idea is that this show is there to bring in a different group of people that wouldn't normally be on the radio because they're not normally catered for through normal programming. All right? An important point to remember is that the information set out is there not only for a presenter, but it's useful for a programmer, program manager, content producer, content creator, anything to do with content. So the big thing to get out of this is that you need to put in the hours, okay? Into your craft. Play with the ideas. Find what works for you. No one can create great content by simply reading or simply taking in what has been said. Let's look at an example of big features and specialist shows that are used both during block programming and during just during show programming to pull in those P2 listeners, to pull in those P2 and P3 listeners. And if we look at 702 specifically for this, 702 has quite a few features that have specialists on them, okay? Specialists who can tell you about a specific program. So for instance, Warren Ingram does a personal finance feature where, so for instance, the Money Show. So this is one of those features. With wealth manager Warren Ingram. Then they have a new feature, which is also a podcast called Crypto for You with Revix, which is brought to you by Colin Cullis, along with the CEO and founder of Revix, Sean Sanders. So again, specialists that are offering this. Another big one that they have is the Money Show, okay, with Bruce Whitfield. Then with regards to their block programming over the weekends, they have This is Africa with Richard Nwamba. an aficionado of Africa and the diaspora and all things related to African music, which stretches from Oliver Mtukudzi and Vusi Mahlasela to Salif Keita and diaspora and all things related to African music. So he's on air Saturdays from 6 to 8 p.m. In the evenings. And then you have your Soulful Sundays, which presents the best of soul music and R&B from both South Africa and around the globe with Paul Mtirara. And Paul and a few others actually pioneered the soul movement in South Africa over a decade ago. So again, a big specialist in the specific field. Okay, so 702 prides themselves with having the specialists on their shows. And then you get BBC, and BBC has a supplier of specialist music content, and it's a company called somethingelse.com. Okay, and Something Else is the biggest supplier of specialist music content to the BBC. They do from the legendary Dance One music show and the Essential Mix. Their work covers a wide spectrum of music genres that include rock, jazz, soul, house, drum and bass, hip hop, and a lot more. So there are over 30 music shows a week across every BBC national music network. Okay, so that's a lot. They work with artists and broadcasting talent to produce audio, video, and social media content for formats that include the rock show, the blues show, Trevor Nelson's Daily Radio 2 show, the Freak Zone, etc. If you were to name a specialist music show within South Africa, who would it be? What show would it be? Is there one that you can think of, except for the ones that I've just mentioned? Other specialist programs would be something, for instance, Marawa Sports Worldwide on Metro FM from 6 to 7:30 in the evenings. Or Metro has a show called, I believe, on a Saturday from 7 to 8 with Oskido. Obviously a specialist in his field, I'm sure you'll agree. And this is a global dance show that focuses on the current dance movement. And because Oskido in his own right is an SA music mogul. So he uses his in-depth music knowledge and his grounded ability to reach just about any listener to host the specific program. So again, another specialist hosting a speciality show for a P2 or P3 listener. Every station has specific features and specialist shows, specialist music shows that have been built in specifically with the aim of targeting those P2 listeners. Okay, so they're P2 and they're P3 listeners. So this is really important. And I want you to please listen to radio. So listen to radio actively, trying to find some of these, trying to see if you can hear some of these features and specialist shows, whatever they might be for, that are not aimed at the P1 listeners, but at the P2 and P3 listeners, okay? And then I want you to tell me about them. Just the last few examples. So features, obviously a very big feature that people tune in for, whether it's your core listeners or whether it's not, is the bridge, Ask a Man. In fact, a lot of that would be P2 and P3 listeners, okay, tuning into that specifically. And then the other one would be Classic or Not, with Anela in the Club. So that's one that takes place 5 days a week that people also tune in for specifically. And then if we look at specialist music shows, apart from all the soul and the jazz and the hip hop shows, etc., you also have your normal show. Well, you also have your top 40 shows. So the 947 top 40 show powered by CTM. Kaya FM has the Elite Nights show. Metro FM has sounds and stuff like that, etc. Okay, so I want you to think about this. So go and listen to commercial radio over the weekend. Whether it's simply commercial or whether you listen to community or PBS also, try and find a couple of these that we can speak about, okay, that you can suss out the difference in audience. And I want you to tell me what makes it different. What makes it different from the overall everyday lineup? Is it the music? Is it the type of presenter that they've put on? Is it the content? What is it that separates that P1 from the P2 listener in this instance? And that brings me to the end of this lecture. Okay, so I'm going to say goodbye for now. Up until next time. Bye.